Hey, Yardfish here. Just in case you're wondering what a yardfish actually is, use your imagination. If not, don't worry about it. It'll probably come to you someday. Maybe. Anyway, I'm still here talking about stuff I like again, and this time it's about a South Korean horror film called The Wailing. Yeah, that might be kind of misleading saying that it's about stuff that I like because it kind of sounded like I'm a big fan of this movie for like the last 10 years or something. That's not actually the case. In fact, I've been told to watch this movie pretty much for like 4 years now since it came out, and I only just got around to doing it. And I really, really should not have been sticking on that because this movie was a trip, right? And I went into this movie entirely blind, and I would advise anyone who's interested in it or in horror in general to do the same. I'm not going to be talking about spoilers or anything like that in my review. If you want to call this a review, more like it's kind of like a blurble. That's kind of how I see it. I'm not exactly Chris Stockman or anything like that, but yeah, as I was saying, I'ma go ahead and be upfront with you right off the bat. I really, really like this movie. And I think if you're the sort of person who like horror films or interesting horror films, then you'll probably like this movie. Especially if you like Asian themed horror films. Because it was pretty good. I should probably put something like that at the end of this whole video, but I just want to get it out to the way right now so that if you're interested, you should just go see it. Don't read anything about it and don't continue watching this video, which is probably a really dumb thing to say because I'm trying to grow this channel. But the less you know, I think the better it might actually be for you. If you still want to continue watching, then cool. Uh, so the Wailing is set in. Um, I am not gonna try to pronounce this because I'll probably butcher it. So yeah, it's set in this place, right? A very rural agrarian South Korean village. And a couple of really nasty things have been happening over the last couple of weeks, ever since this old, strange Japanese man just sort of moved into the bush nearby. People have been started getting infected with some kind of strange illness, causing them to go psycho and kill their entire families. It's pretty gruesome, I should mention that. Unlike a lot of Asian horror films like The Ring and whatnot, this movie is actually pretty, not extremely gory, but it does get rather gruesome at times. There is a lot of blood, but it's not frequent. It's used very sparingly. That's a good thing because this movie is a lot of things. It's creepy, it's eerie, it's suspenseful, and it's also surprisingly really funny, which is one thing I really didn't expect in a movie like this, but in a really good way. I'll talk about that later, though. As for the actual plot, again, so yeah, bad things been happening in this village, right? So we follow this really lethargic police officer who just kind of bumbles his way through the entire situation, trying to figure out what's actually going on. And that leads to a really twisting, turning, churning, eventful ride. Really don't think I should say a lot more than that beyond the fact that this movie pretty much hooked me from the very first scene. We get this really moody opening shot where we follow our main protagonist as he gets up and heads out to this family home in the middle of somewhere where there's been a pretty grisly murder, and it really takes its time setting up and building that entire scene, and it was great, and also a bit on the subversive side because right after that we pretty much have a pretty funny scene where these two guys are batting around their ideas as to what exactly might be going on in town and how to deal with it. And their theories are interesting. They see some things, they hear some things that kind of freak them out. And a lot of the humor from this movie comes from just those regular everyday conversations and the reactions people tend to have to the very disturbing things that they encounter. This movie has some of the most relatable characters I think I've ever seen in a horror film, particularly with regards to how they react to the things that happen to them. Like, there's one scene a bit later on in the movie, I'm not going to really spoil anything, but they're confronted with something that would freak people out, and they are appropriately freaked out, and they're basically there in this state between wanting to run, wanting to fight, wanting to run, wanting to fight, constantly going back and forth. And that really reminded me of how I saw people reacting in situations that were pretty dangerous or pretty high stress. And it felt so real in a way that a lot of horror movies kind of don't feel as real, I think, if that makes any sense. Yeah, hopefully, as these videos go on, I'd probably get more articulate, be able to express my point a whole lot more than whatever I just said there. But I think you might have an idea what I'm talking about, right? The characters in this movie, they feel really, really human. And that is something that I really appreciated in it. For example, our main character, he doesn't really start off as the most likable character. He's not somebody you dislike. Instead, yeah, he's kind of like a manatee, just sort of like drifting along the currents of life, not really doing much of anything, not really taking much of an interest in anything. But as the movie goes on, and as it starts to things start to become a bit more personal to him, we really see that sort of grind down on him, and he becomes a lot more intense, a lot more alive, ironically, as his life falls apart around him. And his actor does a fantastic job. I genuinely was impressed. This movie also doesn't really spend a lot of time with a lot of different characters. The cast is very, very small, and it only really focuses on maybe around three, possibly four characters at max. Everybody else is kind of a supporting cast, and they all do a pretty good job. But I do believe the main character, again, I really don't want to try butchering his name, but he really stands out, does a really good job. Another thing that I really liked about this movie was the fact that throughout this entire movie, I found myself trying to pin down exactly what kind of movie this was, right? And yeah, it's a horror film for sure, but what kind of horror film? Because it plays with a lot of different tropes from different subgenres in horror, and it really kept me guessing for quite some time. I'm not just talking about some movies like The Babadook or something like that might have you thinking, yeah, okay, this might all be in her head, or this could be real. Not quite like that, but it actually seemed to switch genres from time to time. Didn't really switch genres, but that's how I think the audience could perceive it, and the humor especially does sort of trail off after the halfway point as the movie gets a lot more intense, but it's always still there though, just sneaking around in the background, just waiting to jump out at you at a somewhat unexpected moment. But that said, yeah, at the end of it, I felt no need to actually slap a particular label to it to stuff it into a particular niche. Wailing is what it is, and what it is was a real good time to me. And I hope for you too, because like I mentioned before, I think you should go see this movie. Unless, of course, you have some extreme aversion to foreign language films. I don't know if you just don't want to read subtitles or something like that. It's not that hard, dude. Come on. I don't know if there's a dubbed version of it, but if there is, you should probably stay away from it. It might probably kill a lot of the vibe. At least that's kind of how it usually goes for me. I think a dub would be pretty distracting in a movie like this, but that's just me. You do you, right? Whatever you prefer. As for flaws, it's not entirely perfect. No movie is going to be entirely perfect, especially as far as viewer tastes might go. I know there are a lot of people out there who get pretty mad when a movie doesn't really, neatly tie everything up at the end and explain that, yeah, this is what happened. Cool, cool. This movie doesn't really do that. It It does end in a manner that I think might upset some people, but I can definitely guarantee to you that everything you need to piece together what actually happened is right there in that movie. There's actually a scene coming down to the end of the movie, like right near the end, where I think they pretty much put in what is probably a parody of that trick a lot of movies use, like Saw and so on, where they like show like a very brief montage of stuff happening as the main character pieces together. Oh, so this is what happened. Yeah, there's actually a scene sort of like that, only for it to abruptly be cut off and have a character be like, "No, that's not it, dude." I was like, "Oh, I, I, it was a pretty serious scene too." But yeah, that's kind of how this movie is. Oh, and in case I'm giving you the wrong impression, this isn't like a slapstick comedy or anything like that. It's just the humor in there. It's pretty dark, and it's not goofy. It doesn't feel out of place. It feels very natural, very organic, and it's usually the product of conversations and the fact that we, as the viewer, we're nice and safe and snug and don't really have to trouble ourselves with the terrible things that these people are going through. Because from their perspective, it ain't really funny. I do think though that there could have been a bit more info about certain things that were left in to give us a bigger piece of a puzzle to work with. What is there is adequate, but I was left still so very curious as to the nature of what X, Y, and Z were at the end. I uh, I pretty much hopped onto Google and checked out some little tidbits here and there about South Korean folklore and mythology, and it was pretty great stuff. That's one thing I really like about this movie too, is that I've been to South Korea before, but I've only seen the Heart of Seoul, right? That's pretty much what I think the most of us have probably seen from it, thanks to K-pop and stuff like that, and K-dramas. We don't really get to see what life for a lot of other people in these rural areas are like, and this movie was a pretty nice window into that. It was pretty fascinating. It does deal with a lot of like Korean folklore and superstitions, and the fact that uh, shamans, I guess, seem to play a pretty big role in South Korea still. Because while I was there in South Korea, in Seoul, there was actually a street that was pretty much just filled, store after store after store, with uh, shamans, I guess, or psychics, whatever you want to call them, people offering discounts and deals on exorcisms, blessings, and curses and stuff like that. It's pretty weird to see that in the middle of this really hyper modern city. And I thought it was cool. And yeah, this movie touches on a lot of stuff like that. And I really like seeing that. That's one of the best things of watching foreign films, especially foreign horror films. There's a lot of really cool mythology out there that should make for pretty much infinite potential as far as horror movies go. Anyway, I think I talked about this for long enough. The Wailing, it was pretty good. I liked it. You might like it too. Thanks for listening. Bye.